This is the Dexter Report. In-depth discussions and real conversations with true leaders making a mark in their community. Here's your host, Joe Dexter.
Welcome to the Dexter Report, in-depth conversations with true community leaders across this great nation. Today, an unbelievable episode with one of the greatest documenters in our history in this great United States of America, and she's from right here in Rockingham County, North Carolina. Born in Leaksville, Carol M. Highsmith will join us. Carol Highsmith's America. She's donated nearly 100,000 photos to the Library of Congress, and she has done so to give back to the people of this great country. We'll talk to Carol about her upbringing in Leaksville, being born here and coming back here throughout the summers, and how that's impacted her journey to travel this country from Arkansas to Washington, D.C., small towns, big towns, and capture through her lens the beauty of what makes this country unique. It's really a great story, but it's a unique story that tells so much and helps so many. And let me explain what I mean. Not every day do you hear of somebody that takes the road less traveled. As Robert Frost once quelled, it's popular to take the road that everybody's traveling on, the path that's already there, that many bootstraps have taken and made a way for you. And there's no problem with that. There's no problem with taking the popular road. There's no problem with taking the road less traveled. But then there are people like Carol M. Highsmith, born right here in Leaksville, who don't take the popular road. They don't take the road less traveled. In fact, they create their own road. They don't need a dump truck. They don't need the tools to clear the road because their blazing path is going to be burned by the steps that they take, and they're not going to be stopped by anybody. That is what I absolutely love about the story of Carol M. Highsmith. With over nearly at least 100,000 photos in the Library of Congress archive, her own archive, she decided that she wanted to document America, and she's traveled America and captured anything from Ronald Reagan and George Bush and Jerry Carter to the small towns like we live in, Madison, Mayodan, Stoneville. She's been to those places across this great country and given back those photos to the people. I felt the power of her own beaten path simply when I went to the archive of Carol M. Highsmith at the Library of Congress, and I searched. Things I wanted to see. Baseball, there's pictures. I searched small town, there's pictures. I searched for major monuments in this country, there's pictures. She's been there to document during her lifetime what's important in this country, not just from one perspective or one narrative. She created her own path. I'm sure Carol doesn't think about it this way, but think of the accomplishment of being able to go to your own archive and search for anything that is relevant in this country and finding an image that captures that moment. That's the power of Carol M. Highsmith's path. I was fortunate to speak with her. I'm glad to have her here on the Dexter Report. Real conversations with true community leaders. Born right here in Leaksville, her journey has taken her across the country, documenting America, all while donating more than 20,000 images back to the people through the Library of Congress. She's America's photographer. Rockingham County's own Carol M. Highsmith joins us here on the Dexter Report. Carol, so glad to have you on. I'm so happy to finally connect with you and share your story here on the Dexter Report.
Well, I'm excited to be with you. Actually, it's going to be probably more like 100 to 200,000 images.
Wow.
And donated to the most historic photo collection on earth and the largest library in the world, the Library of Congress.
Let's start there with 200,000 images donated back, traveling across America. You start in Leaksville. As you make this journey throughout your life and you continue to do what you're doing now, how much does your background and growing up in a small town influence what you try to document today?
There's probably nothing more truly American than coming down to North Carolina, Rockingham County, and spending the summer with my relatives as I did all my young life. There's nothing. I mean, that is about as American as you get. So you have, everybody working hard, working out in the tobacco farm and planting vegetables and getting ready for dinner and picking blueberries and blackberries. And then you have the whole family that gets together every Sunday, all of them, always. Nobody would want to miss it. We have so much fun. And then the Southern accent and all the wonderful food. I mean, I went to my family reunion for years, right where my grandfather and great-grandfather were born, in the same log cabin, and it still stands. How lucky am I? This is my heritage. And then just the fun we had and the positive attitude. And I remember one negative moment. I had a fight with my cousin, and I came in, and all my aunts were at Granny's, and I said, I had a fight with my cousin. Well, they got up, they hugged me, and said, oh, don't worry, honey. That's the only negative thought that I have about spending all my summers down there. Isn't that just a riot? I mean, it just was that great. I mean, I think about it all the time. So you have to understand that. So I grew up in Minneapolis, and then we drove down south every summer. So what I saw on the way down south was Route 66, all the old gas stations and old motels, and that was my young life. And then getting down to Granny's, and everybody just so happy to see us, and let's play. And I'm telling you, if I could write a dream, that would be it. What my young life was like.
It almost sounds like your journey now, almost a very similar type of thing where you're continuously traveling across America to document those moments. How do you get into photography, and how do you get into telling these stories through that art?
I know, isn't that the truth? Well, the one thing about my family is we all have gumption. I guess maybe we're from North Carolina. That's probably why. So when we have thoughts, we just push ahead and do those thoughts. Everybody I know in my family was kind of creative and interesting. I mean, my mother worked for Billy Graham for 26 years. They were interesting people. They were Southern people, good Southern people. But I didn't start out in photography, but my dad, however, took photographs and movies of us during our entire youth. I have wonderful photographs of me in front of Granny's house. If you only knew what we have. And then he took he went in on one of those Sundays, he went in and took movies of everyone in the room. Well, how great is that? So I can see all the people that I grew up with. So, I went to New York when I was 19. Of course I did. You have that gumption, remember? And I went to apply for a job. And the woman said, well, what background do you have? I said, well, I have two hands. She said, you're hired. And with those two hands, I was hired. And so what I learned, though, down in North Carolina was work ethic, because we always worked every day. They had us out in the fields picking and doing and milking the cows and making dinner. Everybody was industrious. So I was too. So I went to New York and I got this job, and I did very, very well. I mean, it was just kind of a minimal job, but who cared? I was in New York City. Wow. And then I moved to Philadelphia, and I started working in broadcasting. And actually, the job I got in New York was affiliated with broadcasting. So I worked in broadcasting. I worked in broadcasting for about 17 years. Finally putting myself through school. I was in sales and marketing. I traveled all over the world, Russia, China, won all sorts of contests, national contests, everything. Getting back to that gumption again. Getting back to my feeling that I could do anything I wanted. So I went to Russia. Well, right before I went to Russia, one of my clients gave me a camera. Well, you can't go to Russia and take a bad photograph. Are you kidding me? It was right after it opened. So I came back and everybody was goo goo gaga over my photographs. And at that point, I thought, wow, this is kind of neat. So I had this camera that somebody had given to me, and I continued shooting. And one day I was on, several committees and met a lot of people in Washington, D.C. Finally, I moved to Washington, D.C., and I worked in broadcasting down there too, putting myself through school. I was in sales and marketing is what I was in, and I put together European broadcasts. I did all sorts of things. There was nothing that I thought I couldn't do. I decided I would do it, and then I would do it. Are you kidding me? Getting back to the gumption. But anyway, so there was Pennsylvania Avenue, believe it or not, was just starting to be restored. It was just a rat trap. This was America's Main Street. And I knew somebody on a board that I served on that was actually restoring an old hotel called the Willard that was 2 blocks from the White House. And I asked him if I could go in and take photographs with this camera that I took to Russia. And I started taking night school classes just to teach myself photography. And I realized that I just loved it. So I then proceeded to carry on and document all the rebuilding of Pennsylvania Avenue, again, for about 15 years, doing all sorts of things, everything you can imagine. Matthew Brady, who recorded the Civil War and whose actual archive I'm in, he's in the same archive I'm in at the Library of Congress, had a studio on Pennsylvania Avenue. Now, remember, Pennsylvania Avenue is just from the White House to the Capitol. So maybe it's, I don't know, maybe 15 blocks, easily walkable. And many presidents have walked it at their inaugural. So anyway, I went down to this building where Matthew Brady actually had his studio, and Sears had purchased it. And they were renovating it. And I asked them if I could take photographs during the whole renovation, and they agreed. So that also gave me kind of a way to get in. It was a major advertising agency who took it over, and I won an award from it. So that is how I got started. That I was recording Washington, D.C. And I finally quit broadcasting because I just couldn't stand it. I loved photography so much. And then one day, Random House called me, and they were looking for a photograph of one of the monuments in Washington, D.C. They had had trouble with somebody at the Park Service who just said he was going to send it and never did. So I overnighted it to them, and they were, wow, neat. And they said, we have a series of books that we would like to refresh and wondered if you'd be interested. And they're bargain books. Well, I almost hung up the phone until she said, they print about 400 to 600,000 each book.
Wow.
I said, okay, now when can we meet tomorrow? So I went up there with my husband, I'm still married to and still travels with me. And he's a writer, which is great. He worked for Voice of America for 26 years and wrote about America, believe it or not. So we went up there, and Random House sent us out, and we did, I don't know. I think we sold about several million books, if I'm not mistaken. And we went all over America doing books for Random House about America. So while I was in the Willard Hotel, getting back to that for a minute, one day this man walked by with a little mitt full of black and white images. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, we have no architectural drawings. Now, this was called the Hotel of Presidents. Martin Luther King wrote his I Have a Dream speech there. Very famous hotel. Again, 2 blocks from the White House. No architectural drawings. He said, we're using these old photographs from a female photographer who worked here in 1901. And he said she has a collection down at the Library of Congress. Well, of course, I was fascinated. So he said, I'll take you down there. I'll show them to you. So I went down there. I died a million deaths over the woman. who, by the way, Andrew Carnegie sent down south to do the antebellum mansions. So she was Southern too. She finally ended up living in New Orleans on Bourbon Street. But so I decided that day, I went down to the library, saw her collection, Died a Million Deaths, and realized it was about early America. It was about America during, 1900, 1901 through maybe 1930, at a time when we were booming. We were building everywhere. And she was recording it. And I said to the library that day, the staff, I said, you know what? I'm going to do what she did. Well, they looked at me like I was out of my mind. Right. And then I proceeded to do what she did. So, but I think, well, first of all, so Random House hired me to do a books on America. Well, hello. Yes, I love that. Then I realized nobody was doing images of America. They were doing their states or maybe their city, but nobody had taken it on as a ball of wax. So I decided, well, I'll take it on. I had these, all the images I had taken for Random House. And then, I had done a lot in Washington, D.C. And actually 2010, not that long ago, I started the library. I started with the Library of Congress. I did all sorts of things, as I said, on Pennsylvania Avenue and Union Station, everything else you could imagine, starting to gift to them. But in 2010, or prior to that, I decided that I should start to record the entire United States. And so I needed to find the money to do that. So I found somebody. It took about a year. Remember that it was right during the time the economy had taken a dive. So it took about a year to find somebody, but I did. And I started in Alabama.
What's that word? Is it gumption? Gumption?
Yeah, that's the truth. Well, as I said, my relatives were all just fun and just interesting people. And it was, I think I just learned from that. I learned there's no negative. There's no, my husband says, man, you just wear those rose-colored glasses like nobody I've ever seen. Because I just think, I just come up with the idea. I see. I'll give away my work and make a living. No, maybe not. But that's what I did. But I found funders, and the Library of Congress has helped me. And now I'm 41 years into this documentation. I call myself a visual documentarian. 41 years into it.
You have to have a special type of characteristic to give away something that you've done so much. You mentioned going into your first job and saying, I have hands. Well, imagine now, Carol, your hands have moved so many tripods, pushed that button so many times. It's amazing to think about.
Well, and the thing you have to realize is I'm still Rockingham County. That's who I really am. That's who I am. And Minneapolis was also wonderful. And I went to Minnehaha Academy and I was the class clown and, da-da-do. But what I'm saying to you is I'm still that person. I'm exactly that person. I can tell you every inch of Granny's kitchen. I mean, you have no idea the influence it had on me. And as I roll through, the other day, I'm in New Mexico, which is to die for. Oh, but everybody, I went up to Taos, which was just kind of okay, but maybe not my very favorite city. But on the way back, many people had talked to me about this little town called Chimayo. So I went into the town. It has it's a little weeny bean town about the size of Mayodan. Okay, maybe smaller. I have never in my life been so blown away by what I saw. It's mainly just a sacred place is what it is. It has several chapels, maybe 3, 4, and people come there from all over the world. Is that amazing?
That's crazy.
Well, anyway, so I was blown away by it, but here I am in this weenie bean place, quite like where I spent all my summers. And so I wrote the Archdiocese and I said, I would like to come here. I would like to go to these chapels and photograph them because they're amazing. And they said, well, we don't normally let anybody in, but we're going to let you in. And so I went, I just about killed myself. I took 1,000 photographs. And then I went on the Library of Congress the other day, and the last time anybody had been there from the Library of Congress was 82 years ago. Doesn't even look anywhere like it, but it looks like it. You know, still the chapels were there. And so what I'm saying is it was so much like the little town I grew up in, and yet quite so different because the United States is so different. Every state is different. You know, what I saw in North Carolina is different than what I saw in Minneapolis. You know, but yet we're all the United States. We're all in one country. We're Americans. And so I feel such a kind of a kindred spirit, such a love for my fellow man. Because what's America? It's a lot of little towns. It's a lot of little Mayadans and Madisons and Reedsville and Leaksville and all these towns. They're still all there. Yeah, you hear about Washington, D.C. and New York and San Francisco. I've been to all those places a million times. But it's made up of all these teeny weeny places. Do you agree with me?
I agree 100%. And I was looking at that picture that you took compared to the one from the Library of Congress 82 years ago. Just for our listeners' perspective, the one 82 years ago is in black and white. Yours is in color, and the drastic changes of this beautiful place are captured in the camera lens.
Do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you see that? Now, you have to understand one thing, too, which is also very fascinating. I'm working in the highest megapixel camera on Earth. Nothing compares. And so the detail that they will be able to see 100 to 1,000 years from now in the Library of Congress, because it'll still be preserved, will fascinate them. So that's why I'm so excited, too, because I'm on this really high-end camera equipment.
And what's cool, Carol, to me is 1,000 years from now, whatever that building becomes, whatever the view is from inside, they'll have yours to compare to the one from 82 years ago. And
I know.
It's so cool.
I know it is. And see, I forget that sometimes. I must admit the other day when I looked on the library and I thought, well, let me just see what, if anybody had ever taken it. Of course they had, because it's so important. But it's the size of Mayodan, maybe smaller. But do you understand the importance of that? That's who we are. And the reason that a visual study is so important, well, I'll tell you 2 reasons right off. Dorothea Lange, I'm in that same collection too. Had we not been able to see the Depression, how would we know what it was? And then there's the pandemic images. Had we not the pandemic, I'm sorry, the 1918 Spanish flu. That was magnitude. Oh my Lord, that was many, many, many times more people died from that. But there's images. There's images of it. So it really helped me understand, okay, now we wear masks, they wore masks. Wow. So, but I also, just for me to go back and photograph our family reunions. People, they're moved by it. I don't know if you saw this, but I was in the movie. Now I'm going to have to look it up. Let me look it up. I'll tell you in a minute.
Okay.
I wasn't. One of my photographs was. It wasn't me. It was us. Oh, yeah, let me look it up because it's really worth telling you what it was. uh, let's see. Anyway, so I guess what I'm saying to you is how much it meant for me to grow up where I grew up and how lucky I was to have that such a positive outlook from all of my relatives and just have so much fun. I mean, how can you replace that? You can't. There's nothing like it. You'll carry that with you all your life.
I think too, from my perspective, I'm sure a lot of people find interest in respect your characteristics because of where you come from, because you still carry them today. It gets you in the door with a Ronald Reagan. It gets you in the door with Siegfried and Roy.
It's true.
If you have that type of mentality of from where you come from and you're true to yourself, which you are, that's the key in anything, right? I imagine that's why you've taken 200,000 photos.
Well, I haven't quite yet, but I'm heading.
You're going to get
direction.
there.
Yeah, but you're right. I think because somebody said the other day that, because I'm just kind of me, I'm just real easygoing and kind of true to life. And I am, because I was taught that what's wrong with that? Isn't that just great to be? Aren't I lucky that I had these very real people that I grew up with? Here it is. So our family, a photo I took of our family reunion in front of the house, the log cabin where my grandfather and great grandfather were born, is called Hillbilly Elegy by Ron Howard. And it's a photo of us. And I didn't know anything about it. All of a sudden, people started sending it to me and saying, "Look, is that your photograph?" So it was.
You've captured so many different things nationally and in these small towns, as we've talked about. Where does that accomplishment rank among the great things that you've done? Because I would imagine actually seeing your family and actually seeing a picture that you took of your family, I believe it's Netflix, right? That it's on. To see that has to just give you some motivation.
Well, because I'm giving my images copyright free, my images are used all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And matter of fact, The Irishman, the movie The Irishman, I got a wonderful credit at the end. But here's what I say: it's not about me; it's about us. It's about who we are. That's what I'm trying to show you. We are who I saw when I was young. We're lucky to be in America. I went to Russia and China right after they were open, and I couldn't believe what I saw. We're very fortunate. I know we're kind of going through rough times right now, but we're very fortunate to be American citizens. I feel. I've always felt that. And so why wouldn't I just be so excited? I've never become jaded. How could I become jaded? Look what I have. Look what we've done. Look who we are. Look who I had as relatives. So, I guess I could say, oh, look at me, aren't I wonderful? But I think I'm just doing what comes naturally, very, very frankly. And what comes naturally is I would like to see other Chamayas, other little towns like what I grew up in, only they're different. Well, isn't that great? How lucky are we? So, and New Mexico is just so very different. But North Carolina is to die for too. So, we have these states. They're all very different. They're all interesting, fascinating. For instance, when I was in Arkansas recently, going out to Johnny Cash's original home, boyhood home. Boy, talk about reminding me of my upbringing. And I photographed the interior of his house. They've restored the whole thing. It's just fabulous. All the original furniture and everything's there. So, I just got chill bumps doing it because it just reminded me of Granny's. And then what's so great? Can you imagine both of those log cabins still are standing? Granny's house is still standing. Many of my cousins' houses are still standing. And what the deal was is that every one of the children got a plot of land. That's how much land they owned. And so we lived there too. In the summers, we actually had a house there. So Granny had all of her children around her on a whole. Isn't that fabulous? And then the other thing is there was a newspaper article that at one point she had 5 boys in World War II.
Wow.
Yeah. So she was kind of famous in her own right. Well, she was famous for having 15 children. And then Granddad used to have a kind of a candy store across the street from their house. And, just think of your childhood and hear me talk. And you know that how neat it was. You just know it was. Everything about it was. And these teeny tiny towns, Madison, Mayodan, Leaksville, Reedsville, they're wonderful towns, filled with fantastic people. So this woman that was Andrew Carnegie sent down to record the South, she was wonderful too. And can you imagine what she recorded? So it wasn't just Annabella Mansions, it was the South. What did the South look like during her lifetime? Well, wow. And then I've done quite a few presidential homes and collections. So she also knew Teddy Roosevelt. And so she went and photographed him on his horse when he was in the Cuban War that we had. And he had this hat on. Well, when I photographed his home and his collection, including his death mask, I photographed the hat that he had on when she photographed him.
Man.
I know, that's what I said. And I've been to her house. She lived in New Orleans. I've been to her house. I've photographed her house. I've died a million deaths over her house. And to think that she lived there, wow. So that's where she finally retired. And she was an alcoholic, and I'm not. I don't drink at all. So we were quite different, but she was very Southern, So, but I don't know. I mean, how could you not get excited about America?
Absolutely. And how can we, as you travel and you've been in these areas and you look back on your childhood, I look at my childhood and the happiness that it brings. You mentioned going back and reaching back to that. I think we can use that to unite ourselves. Like you mentioned, we're different everywhere. But if we go back to our childhood and we look back at the things that brought us together, nothing really tore us apart.
Nothing. As I said, I mentioned one little negative thing, and that is that my cousin was mad at me. And that became a positive because my aunts all came and hugged me to death. That's the point, isn't it? And that's why I even brought it up. Because how about looking at the sunny side? Because that's how I look at things. The other day, there was an article, some magazine put an article out of the most miserable cities. And I sent it to a friend of mine because one of the town where he grew up, which was a small town, was in that most miserable cities. And he wrote an article about that. And then he included me at the end of it. He said, can you imagine that we're discussing and showcasing the most miserable cities when Carol Highsmith, all she thinks about is how wonderful we are and how shiny we are from sea to shining sea. Listen, I'm not saying that everything's perfect. I photographed a house the other day that was an old house, and definitely everybody had moved out. And I'm sure it had 1 million stories to tell, but it had a lot of character. But I don't look at that and say, well, look at this town's falling apart. Things move on, things change. Unfortunately, there's a lot of sameness in a lot of our towns now. So instead of going through a town and seeing all the character, luckily there's still quite a bit of Route 66 there, and I've been on it a lot. But we still we're lucky to have what we have. We're lucky to have the character that we have. And what about just enjoying it and embracing it rather than thinking, well, how can we I don't like my neighbor because their hair color is different. And I think it's just because of my upbringing. I really do. There's nothing really necessarily that taught me this, except my life has taught me this.
We're all different. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different things that are going to happen to us in the future. And one thing I like to always say is the more cohesiveness that we have together and the more stories that are told, whether it's through photos like you, words like me on this podcast that reveal the whole picture, the better off we are. If we can let people be who they are, if we appreciate them for who they are, the story is going to be told so much better from not just one narrative, but from every narrative possible.
That's so true. And my grandmother, my granny rather, had a woman who worked for her, Maisie. Her name was Maisie. We all knew Maisie. I used to go and pick blackberries with her, and I loved her. Now, she was black. I didn't know that. I didn't know what color she was. I just knew I loved her. It was that simple, period. Because everybody in the family did. So, hello. I mean, can't we, we're all human beings. And that is the road I take. It's the road I'm going to take for the rest of my life. But I do believe that it has a lot to do with my Southern upbringing, all the love that I got from all of my relatives, and just the fun we had, and that I wasn't ever bored. I never went to Madison, North Carolina and spent the summers with all my cousins and aunts and uncles and granny and said to myself, I'm bored stiff. I couldn't wait to get up in the morning. I couldn't wait to run around and do all the things we did and climb the tree and go to our, playhouse and everybody smiled. And I don't know, I think that had such a profound influence on me that it's just all I can. I very rarely go into a dark place, except for a little bit of worry, about us and the pandemic. But I mainly, my days are spent just thinking positive thoughts. What can I do rather than how am I going to do, or why would I do that? I think, my whole brain is filled with how much can I get done today? What can I give to others? How interesting New Mexico is, or Oklahoma, or, I just worked in Kentucky, Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. That's where I've been for the last 5 months. Every one of those states, I just went, wow. Every one. They were fabulous. They all had something to offer, a lot to offer. Now, nobody takes the place of North Carolina, I'll agree. But they're all, the reason they have so much to offer is because they're all so unique.
She's Carol Highsmith. You can follow her trip on Facebook.com/Carol M. Highsmith America. Before I let you out of here, Carol, I've got to ask, with your spirit, the way that you've been able to do things and not be afraid to, what would your message be to somebody that's looking to do something unique that they're maybe afraid to take the first step?
Well, take it. Just take it. You may fail, but guess what you're going to do? You're going to learn. You're going to learn from that failure, pick yourself back up, and try again. Don't ever say no. You're an American. That's what we're made of. I love this country. I really do. And I love every city and town and teeny, teeny, teeny town. We're lucky to be here, folks. Take advantage of it.
She's Carol M. Highsmith, Carol M. Highsmith's America. Follow her journey, carolhighsmithamerica.com. Keep up with Carol and her journey as she captures America and adds to her donation of images to the most historic photographic collection in the world at the Library of Congress. Carol, your road is not the one less traveled. It's your own road. You've traveled it, and I love that about you.
Thank you so much for your interest. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
And thank you for your time. We appreciate you stopping by the Dexter Report.
Okay.
Does it get more genuine than that conversation? Carol M. Highsmith joining us on the Dexter Report, in-depth conversations with true community leaders. To follow what Carol is doing across this great country, you can visit carolhighsmithamerica.com to learn more. And I encourage you to search her archive at the Library of Congress online. Just search for Carol M. Highsmith and you'll find the great archive full of amazing pictures from across this great country, from the major cities and major monuments to the small towns that you never would have seen otherwise, to the beautiful artifacts and beautiful murals across this country, from a courthouse in North Dakota to the Sears Tower in Chicago. There's so many different things you can see on Carol Highsmith's archive. I guarantee you'll find a beautiful picture that you'll love and might be able to use for something in the future. Thanks again to America's photographer, Carol M. Highsmith, for joining us on the Dexter Report. In-depth and real conversations with true community leaders. To find out more, look to your favorite podcast platform for the Dexter Report. And remember, blaze your own path. Be a Carol Highsmith. Tell your story because it matters. It's unique and it's you. For more on the Dexter Report and how I can help you tell your story, visit joedextermedia.com. Have a great week, everybody. Take care, be safe, and share your story.
Thanks for listening to the Dexter Report. To learn more about our community and how Dexter Media can assist telling your story, visit facebook.com/Dexter Media Solutions.